Up to this point, I've never owned a Cadillac. Not that there haven't been good options or interesting options or fun to drive options, but nothing's been such a compelling package that really drew me in. And I'm not saying I'm putting my money there now, but if I was, this is what it would go towards. This is the 2026 Cadillac Optiq V. It's the latest member of the V family with over 500 horsepower in a pretty compact size. It's also got all-wheel drive, room for you, your friends, and your stuff. And the best part is it's almost completely unrecognizable from the Chevy Equinox with which it's related. There may be some who say Cadillac's throwing the V badge around a little bit these days, but I would disagree. I think they're taking one of their smallest vehicles and making it one of their most interesting, especially visually. And I also have to say, this might be one of my favorite front ends on just about any vehicle on the road right now. New vehicle at the very least, which is impressive because it's electric, meaning there is no grille. And grille has always been an important part of styling elements, but in this case, they've taken what should be the grille and kept it interesting. You get a geometric pattern all the way across the front end, and on the outside of it, you get that same pattern but illuminated. At night, this has a really good look, and obviously if you need to see, you've got really tall signature LED lights that are going to match what you find in some of the larger Cadillac models as well. But with the V logo also comes more aggression, and we're definitely getting that in the lower chin of the vehicle. Not only is this more open than we find on the regular Optiq, but you also have the option to go ahead and get some carbon fiber components, which I absolutely would, and that gives you a nice spoiler down here below. And even though it's not carbon fiber, you get an insert here that on other Optiqs is going to be more body colored, and in this case it has a similar geometric pattern to what we find here, but also just adds, I don't know, a lot more attitude. A performance vehicle can't just look the part, it has to, well, perform. And with the V badge behind me, there's already some reputation to live up to. There's plenty of power on board, but managing that, that's the task. And even though this has 21-inch wheels like you can get on the standard Optiq, these ones are unique, and the tire around it is also going to be exclusive to the V. This, in this case, is a summer tire. You don't have to get one, but that's gonna be the best possible traction. It's a 275/40 R21, and in this case, that's going to be a square setup, not staggered. That means this is the best possible traction from the factory. Of course, you could do something different on your own, but the next challenge is to manage the weight. And that's gonna be in two ways. Stopping the vehicle, in which case we do get Brembo brakes up front, in this case in blue. We also have to change the suspension layout from what we get on every other Optiq, and in this case they've gone with continuous dampers rather than something like a magnetic ride or an air suspension. That does keep the cost down. It also makes things a little bit simpler and easier to repair, but the question is the trade-off really worth it in the end? And I can tell you right now how that translates, but I'll wait till I get behind the wheel. If there's any miss on the Optiq V, I think the one thing I like is that it's sat just a little bit lower. It's got about 6 inches of ground clearance, which is not bad by any stretch, but that's about the same as we get on the Optiq, and I wish this was just a little bit more squat. But what isn't missing is a little bit of flair. And that spoiler that we get in the back here, the carbon fiber spoiler in this case, I absolutely love. It's sort of a low-key radical. It's big, it's there, but it's not on top of the vehicle. It's not blaring out front. And it does sort of blend in with the rest of this already athletic-looking vehicle, especially with the black roof. Actually, when we were shooting this, there's a lot of darker stuff behind us, and if the roof seems to disappear, that's kind of what Cadillac is going for. They just want to visually lower the vehicle, and again, I just wish it sat a little bit lower on top of things. But when it comes to the other styling cues, obviously we have our V badge off there to the side. We have one strip down here at the very bottom, but I'm glad there's not too much striping going on or way too much black plastic. Actually, the sport trims of the Optiq do have a lot more black, and I actually wish it had a little bit more body color. This seems to be a pretty good balance throughout. But if you're looking at spec sheets, this is the one spot you might find a lot of similarities between this and the Equinox, and this is probably the only time I'll mention that because they are gonna be the same wheelbase and they are basically the same length. This will be just a hair over, and a lot of that has to do with the different spoilers that it has on top of it and the different shape of the bumper. But just about everything else has changed in a pretty drastic way, and one that I certainly appreciate. Around back is where you'll see the biggest pop from that carbon fiber spoiler I mentioned and the most prominent look at it, but it's not the only carbon fiber you'll find. If you look a little bit farther down below, you'll see that diffuser inspired lower bumper. I love the way it looks. I'm not sure how ultra aerodynamic it really is. I don't think it's making a ton of impact, especially on your drive to and from town, but I do love the way it looks. But from the rest of it, in the best possible way, it's mostly Optiq from there. That V badge is gonna be one of the distinguishing factors, and I appreciate that we don't have V badges everywhere. They're just sprinkled around in what I would say is a pretty classy way. But what I really like, go ahead and click on the classic Cadillac design, although in this case, colorless, and you'll find plenty of storage capacity. Now in this case, we've got 2 people's worth of stuff for basically the week, and that's gonna pretty quickly fill up that 26 cubic feet of storage capacity, but if I needed to fit more in here, I certainly could. Just a little bit of shuffling around should do the trick. Now onto power, there's not only a whole lot of it, but also maybe less than you would have expected, because the battery pack here is shared with every other Optiq, meaning 85 kilowatt hours available, which ultimately means less range than those models, as well as less power to push out to the motors. And those motors are borrowed over from the Lyriq V, which means 650 pound-feet of torque is what we get in this model, but since we don't have the same battery capacity to feed those, we're not over 600 horsepower, in this case down to 519. But Cadillac says that should still be good for about 3.5 seconds at 0 to 60, which makes a lot of sense because even though that's less power than the Lyriq, or you get over in something like a Blazer EV SS, it's also a lighter vehicle, so it doesn't need quite as much power. Though there's another area that it could use more power, and that's going to be in charging. Let's go ahead and click on our Cadillac logo here. The auto opening door will now reveal our J3400 NACS connector. No longer do we have a CCS combination port. But we haven't seen an increase in the charge rate, which means this will top out at 150 kilowatts, which to me is not going to be a big deal. That assumes you have to do 150 miles each way on a road trip or a trip to grandma's house, and I don't think that happens too often. And it means a few more minutes at the charger. Certainly it'll add up on a much, much longer trip, but it is gonna be noticeably less than you find on, well, pretty much all of the competition. What it will excel versus the competition though is charging at home, because you can get a 19.2 kilowatt charger capacity here, which means it's gotta be one of the quickest charging vehicles you'll find at home. Normally it's a much bigger battery vehicle with much lower efficiency, so in a mile per hour plugged in, this should be absolutely top of the charts. When it comes to an Optiq, this is gonna be the most comfortable way you can ride around in one because of the seat arrangement. We get an 8-way adjustable instead of a 6 that you get in the standard model, and that includes things like bolster adjustment here on the sides and down at your legs. So if you wanna feel a little bit tighter going into some corners, this is gonna be a great way to do it. You will still have to adjust your steering wheel manually, but there is plenty of room here. And with the seat set for myself, usually I like to sit it all the way down and have that lower cushion tilted so it reaches my knees. I still have probably, well, let's say 2 or so inches before I hit anything. In this case, I have the shade open for the roof, which means it gives me an extra, well, ultimately about 4 or 5 inches just above my head. But I expect things will be a little bit different in the back. And unfortunately, my hunch was correct. Things back here get tight. Now, as far as legroom, I still have a few inches from the seat in front of me. This is set for me as the driver, but as you may also notice, my knees are pretty high up. Honestly, level with just about my rib cage because we sit so much on the floor, but the rest of the floor is up so close to us. So not a whole lot of support here. And the bigger problem is likely that I've run completely out of headroom. Now, if I lean forward, I actually have a bunch because again, we still have that roof above me. Let's say 3.5 inches for sure. But if I sit all the way back, well, I can only get to about here before I run out of roof, or at least glass roof, which means I'm running into regular roof, which means out of headroom. If I slide all the way over here, I've got this seat all the way furthest back in the tracks. And now I have to wiggle in just a little bit to fit. And unfortunately, I am touching. You might be able to see a little bit better where I have room and where I very suddenly don't. But it doesn't mean that it's gonna be super uncomfortable for folks back here. I'm 6 feet tall and I sit very tall, so not everyone's gonna run into that same situation. I've also got a nicely padded armrest with 2 additional cup holders. I've got 2 vents in front of me, heated outboard seats, 2 USB-C ports, and a standard plug as well. So I should have my amenities just a little bit tight on space. And speaking of space, if you wanted to fit your family back here, well, that's gonna be a little bit tight as well. As I mentioned, this is one of Cadillac's smallest models, and if we measure out from the back of the seat to the front of mine, or the front of this seat to the back of mine, I'm coming in at just about 27 inches. So some of those larger rear-facing seats just wouldn't quite fit in this space. You'd have to go ahead and slide that a little bit forward, which folks certainly can. Again, I am still 6 feet tall. Or you'd want to make sure that this seat's a little bit farther forward. And you will find latch anchors on both of the outboard seats, but they are going to be this kind of plastic cover bits. If you want a deeper dive on child seat fitment, go ahead and check out our full video when we get this back at home for a week of testing. Time to hop inside, and even though we have a lot of orange on the outside, you're gonna find a lot of blue here on the interior. And as much as I really like this blue, I would probably not pair this much blue with this exterior color. I think I really would change the exterior color to match all of the blue accents available. You'll notice it's gonna be a dark interior pretty much however you go, or at least a darker interior generally speaking, but you get those nice blue accents. If you want though, you can get blue seat belts and blue seat backs. That is gonna be an available option. Obviously it costs a little bit more, and please make sure you match it with the right colors. You'll also find a splash of blue down there, not just in the water bottle, but highlighting the 19-speaker AKG sound system that's in the Optiq V and in every Optiq. That also includes Dolby Atmos, as long as using the right streaming service. In this case, we were using Amazon Music today, and that of course has Dolby Atmos, but at the moment, check and make sure your favorite streaming service is one that's capable of it. If you want to adjust your seats, that's not found on the side of the seat, it's up there in the door panel. 2-position seating over here available on the driver and the passenger side, and of course on a performance model you can go ahead and adjust your bolsters as well. That's the lower cushion as well as up in the midsection. There's a lot of screen real estate as well. We'll get there in just a moment. Let's talk about some of our storage capacity, because down below you're going to find a carpeted open space under the floating center console there. Lots of room, so something like a purse would probably fit just fine. Maybe a tissue box. Things shouldn't roll around too much just because of that carpeted texture. And then of course, if we slide just above that, what is actually floating, I apologize, I know there's a lot of glare, but surrounded here in gloss carbon fiber, you'll find your main control space if you don't want to use the touchscreen capabilities. So this wheel will go ahead and control that main display. You can also go ahead and use some of these shortcuts to get to things like your phone, your music, or back to the home button. If you want to adjust your volume, in this case, it's going to be that scroll wheel. There's a little bit more storage to be found out front here. This is probably good for something like a passenger phone, but if you're wondering where you put your device, in this case, there's a really handy little slot. And I'll just have to open up the center console here, and you can see that this Qi wireless charging mat is one that takes up almost zero extra space. Just make sure you have a phone that will stick up a little bit, otherwise I'd probably forget it's in there. While we have that open, go ahead and take a look at the amount of space. It's not a whole lot, I have to admit, but you do get that floating console design, so you can go ahead and make use of this stuff under what we're looking at right now. Plus your 2 cup holders. Now let's go ahead and move on to the big screen. In this case, it's a 33-inch screen that spans all the way from to the left of the steering wheel over to the infotainment section. And over here on the left-hand side, that's touch, so too is the right-hand side. This is running Google Automotive or Android Automotive, but not able to do phone projection. So no CarPlay and no Android Auto. I know a lot of people dislike that. Admittedly, I'm one of them, but I have to admit, if it's not going to be present, then using a Google system is probably the second best. You can see here we have our Play Store. You also have things like your Google Maps and pretty good integration. You're also going to be able to log into a lot of your Google accounts, and a lot of your apps will be here, but may not work quite as seamlessly as they would in phone projection. That is going to be a bit of a bummer, especially because we have such a large screen. All isn't lost though. That large screen carries over here to the driver display, where there's a lot of things you can go ahead and change. Actually, I'll peek over here. You can see that this is our layout, so we can move things like energy, our map functions. You can move on to an assist. A lot of different ways you can do it, but gauge cluster is where I had it most of the day. And if there's additional information you want up here, well, that's going to be where you can go ahead and utilize that heads-up display. Hard to capture it here on camera, but plenty of information to be found there. And before I get too far, this plastic top means that we can do Super Cruise. So you get the performance vehicle, you get the comfortable ride of a Cadillac, you also get the convenience of having hands-free driving available. Before I go back to the steering wheel, I also have to admit I really like the use of these different materials. As much as this blue is really nice, it also might be a little bit harsh for some, but it's offset by having this woven texture found throughout the interior. And then of course we have a nice softer touch just above that, but there's a really good mix here. And of course just below that, it's our carbon fiber, and it just makes for a really dynamic interior. And with a vehicle as dynamic as the Optiq V, it blends together really nicely. Now back to that steering wheel. You won't find any paddle shifters here, but you will find a regenerative paddle. In this case, it's a progressive paddle, so the farther you pull it, the more regenerative capacity you get. That's great to increase what you have already engaged, or to have access to some even when you don't like driving it very often. On the right-hand side of the steering wheel, mostly controls for your infotainment. So things like your volume up and down, track forward, backward, use your voice commands, answer your phone, that sort of thing. Sliding over to the left, mostly controls for things like your adaptive cruise control, your Super Cruise, adjusting your follow distance or your speed on standard cruise, and then of course our V button. This is the Optiq V. Press and hold that V button and you will activate the V mode, which gives you a nice little animation across the board. You also hear a sound that comes along with it, and that means that we are in the most powerful configuration, 519 horsepower, 650 pound-feet of torque. Time to get the Optiq V out on the road, and what better way to do it than join the Michigan commute home. We are going to be probably in a little bit of traffic, but good news, earlier today we had wide open roads, although there's a little bit of bad news as well. When we were testing this, we weren't able to, on regular roads, get our 0 to 60 time much below 4 seconds. Now Cadillac says 3.5. There was a spot for us to do that on a more racetrack area, but even then we didn't quite have a full charge and figured, listen, we're gonna wait until we get it home for further testing where we know our roads, we know the charge conditions, and we're not trying to set it up for optimal success, but we fell a little bit short today. Although honestly, it didn't hamper much of anything from this driving experience because this car is blistering quick and all that oomph off the line, that 650 pound-feet of torque, hits you like a hammer in the back of the head, especially if you're not expecting it. And it's just a lot more than you'd expect from something with such a small package. I think I said earlier I wouldn't mention the Equinox again, but considering that this is based on the Equinox or familiar with it, this just seems like worlds apart and all for the better. If you're trying to decide between a standard Optiq or the upgraded V version, no doubt 0 to 60 times punch off the line, total horsepower is going to be a reason to look over here. But what happens when it comes to the ride quality? And I have to admit, while the Optiq is pretty plush in terms of, well, especially electric cars, this one is noticeably tighter. It feels like things have been screwed down a couple notches, but not to a point where any of it feels punishing, harsh, tiring. It's a really good balance where you can feel what's happening beneath you. You can tell you just hit a really big pothole, which there are a few of out here in Michigan, but at no point does it become painful or not anything I experienced today. And it's enough that if you are gonna drive a little bit harder on your open back road, on your favorite twisties, that the car feels nice and planted. At no point is it gonna start wallowing. The only wall you're gonna notice is when it comes to weight transfer. Not in how the suspension handles it, just that the suspension is handling it. Because this is pretty heavy. And it ends up actually almost being more dense than it is heavy because it's a lot smaller. And boy, can you feel it throwing its weight around, especially when you start driving harder. I think the tires are up for the task, especially these summer ones, but just knowing that if we shaved off a few 100 pounds even, it would be noticeably different. I had a chance to drive the rear wheel drive model and it felt so much lighter up front, and while not nearly as powerful, plenty of get up and go. So I would almost like to see a really high powered rear wheel drive option, though the way things are moving forward, I know all wheel drive is the new performance layout and I just have to come to accept it. Day to day, there's not much in the way of downsides for all wheel drive, but when you start pushing things harder, that's where you start to notice things like understeer. And we had a chance to put this out on an autocross course, and it's not dissimilar to what we've done in the Lyriq V before, but note that the Lyriq V is not only more powerful, but bigger and heavier and a longer wheelbase, and the layout of these autocross tracks were pretty different. Everything on this one was tight. There wasn't a lot of room to stretch your legs. It was a lot more back and forth, and that was to highlight how much more agile this is than something like Lyriq V or a Blazer EV-SS, and I have to say it did a good job there, though I admit I found a cone or two along the way. But it was still a ton of fun to drive. And again, there are a lot of roads back home that I can't wait to try this on because it is just so much fun. And at the end of the day, I think that's what folks are looking for here. If you are looking for a true autocross champion, this isn't it, not even in the electric world. But if you want to make your drive to work more interesting, you found it. If you want a good sound system, it's here. If you want your road trips, even though we don't have the greatest range or fastest charging, to be more enjoyable, get Super Cruise. All of those add up to what is ultimately a really good package. The things that are missing, the things that you could change, maybe some wider tires or a staggered layout or an air suspension would make a difference, but I'm not sure it'd be an enormous difference. And I'd love to try it out side by side. Show me the prototypes, get us out on the road, put us on the test track. But you, the consumer, I'm not sure you notice it, especially if you're out on a drive like I am right now, which is turning into some stop and go traffic. This might not have a big footprint, but I think it's going to leave a pretty big impression, not just on Cadillac, but also performance vehicles and what electric cars can do moving forward. Yes, they can always have a lot of power, but are they really fun to drive? Are they engaging? And is Cadillac right to put a V badge on something that doesn't go vroom? I don't know. Ultimately, that's going to be left to history, but what I can tell you is that what you pay for this, in my opinion, is surprisingly low. $68,795 gets you the package. Not all the fixings, but certainly the package. The power, the performance, but obviously if you want stickier tires and you want all the carbon fiber, of course you're gonna have to add those as well. But unless you're looking at the best bargain out there, as far as horsepower to dollar, I mean, something like the Blazer EV SS is certainly going to be up there, but that's not quite the same experience. This one is going to feel premium. It's going to feel elevated, and yes, maybe you could buy a used Porsche Taycan, but your insurance is going to have to be Porsche Taycan dollars, so whatever you saved, you might end up paying a little bit more for than you thought. I am disappointed though that we weren't able to get that 3.5 second 0 to 60 out on our drive today, but when we get it home for testing, obviously we are gonna put that through, make sure it's fully charged, and not that it has optimal conditions, but it's ready to do what it says it can do. But no matter what the charge has been today, it's put a smile on my face. I've absolutely loved this. And again, if I was gonna put my money on a Cadillac right now, this would be it, hands down. Let me know if I'm crazy, if this V badge isn't where it should be, if the Optiq just isn't worth it, and what you would get instead. Let me know down in the comment section below. If you have any other thoughts, questions, comments, or concerns, you can leave them there on top of that. And until next time, I'll see you down the road.